I closed the laptop slowly. The screen dimmed, casting a faint blue glow across the table. Enough to light the folded wedding photo I hadn't moved in weeks. It used to sit in a silver frame on his desk. Now it lay in two neat halves, creased down the center, like something divided on purpose. I didn't cry. I hadn't for a long time. Outside, the city hummed, impatient, indifferent, the way he had been near the end. I stared at the edge of the table. There was a coffee ring there he'd never noticed. I left it untouched, a small stain that no longer bothered me. 3 years ago, he told me I'd be nothing without him. I didn't argue. I didn't explain how many nights I stayed late managing the books, how much of my own savings I slipped into his startup just to cover payroll, or how many times I let the credit card slide because we were building a dream. His dream. Now he had the dream, and I had the silence that came after. I made tea. No sugar, no honey, just heat and water and the space between. There was something strangely full about the emptiness, like I was finally inhabiting the parts of my life he'd never asked about. The apartment was small, 2 rooms, 1 window. But the desk was mine. The name on the lease was mine. Even the bills, even the tax forms, mine. That night, I opened my old planner. The one I used back when we still thought everything we built would have both our names. I flipped to a blank page and wrote one sentence: silent recovery is still recovery. I left the photo where it was, not because I couldn't move it, but because I didn't need to. Sometimes, leaving something broken in place is the first real decision you make for yourself. I ran my fingers along the crease. One side, his smile. Sharp suit. Confidence as currency. The other, me. A little softer. A little lost in the background. Even then, it had been telling the truth. I used to be the one behind the spreadsheets. The one who knew how much the servers cost. The one who remembered which supplier offered 3% off if paid within 5 days. He remembered none of it. He remembered to stand on stage, though. He remembered to shake hands, smile for the press. He remembered to thank everyone, except the person who stayed late and signed checks in silence. That used to bother me. Now it just doesn't. I poured my tea, sat by the window. Across the street, a cab stalled at the corner. A woman with 2 bags balanced a coffee on her knee while texting. I watched her for a while, not out of envy, but to remind myself. I, too, had learned to juggle. Only now I wasn't balancing someone else's dream. I was holding my own name again. We used to share a Google Calendar. He color-coded everything. Meetings in blue, flights in red, investor calls in green. I was yellow. Not me, exactly. Just things I did. Update payroll, file quarterly returns, remind him to eat. When we first started, he used to say, "We're in this together." Then later, "I need to focus on the big picture. You're better with the details." And by the end, "This isn't working anymore." That was the last thing he said to me. No shouting, no accusations, just a closing slide in a meeting that had gone too long. We'd built the company out of our apartment. Back then, it was just the 2 of us, 3 laptops, and a dream that smelled like cheap ramen and burnt coffee. I learned to track expenses. He learned to pitch. I stayed up learning Excel shortcuts. He stayed out networking. When the first client check arrived, he took a photo for Instagram. When the first invoice bounced, I was the one who called, gently, to collect. I didn't need the spotlight, but I didn't think I'd be erased either. The day of the divorce, we sat across from each other at a long, cold table. He looked like he was already late for something. I looked like someone who had made peace with too many versions of goodbye. He didn't ask for the ring. He didn't ask how I'd pay rent. He just said, "It's probably for the best." I signed the papers. Then I watched as he walked away with the name, the equity, the public sympathy, and the dog. That night, I opened an old spreadsheet on my computer, one from the early days, back when the margins were slim and the stakes were high. Cell B17 still had a note in it. Claire's advance, $2,000, to cover gap. It wasn't legally binding. It wasn't even officially recorded. But I remembered. I remembered where the first 3 paychecks came from. I remembered whose credit line kept the lights on the first winter. I remembered who skipped a birthday trip to help him fly to a pitch event in Denver. He never mentioned those things again. So neither did I. Until now, maybe. But even now, I'm not angry. Just awake. It started with a headline. I wasn't looking for it, just scrolling through the finance section over morning tea, the way some people check obituaries as if half hoping to see a version of themselves declared extinct. Catalyst, Dynamics faces, liquidity crisis, layoffs likely. Catalyst. That was his company, our company, once. I read the article twice, not out of malice, but to see if anyone mentioned the first 3 years, the quiet years. The years before the first investor, before the logo redesign, before the board. Of course, they didn't. They mentioned his name 5 times. They mentioned a rumored lawsuit. They mentioned undisclosed debts. They didn't mention the woman who'd once restructured payroll on a Sunday night so 15 employees could get paid before Christmas. That woman was gone now, but her eyes were still open. I closed the article, drank my tea cold, then opened a folder I hadn't touched in almost 2 years. Seed funds, ideas worth saving. Inside were 6 files, small companies, all minority-owned, all early stage, all with potential, and 1 document saved at the bottom. What I would have done differently, Claire T. I opened it. It wasn't a business plan. It was a quiet manifesto. No pitch deck, no jargon, just a list of values. Keep teams small. Hire people who've been overlooked. Build slowly. Don't raise capital until you know how to live without it. I hadn't written it for anyone but myself. Now it felt like a blueprint, not for revenge, for return. I made 1 phone call, not to a lawyer, not to a friend, to a woman I'd met at a conference 4 years earlier, someone who once said, "If you ever want to build something quiet but real, call me." Her name was Nora. She ran a boutique investment firm in Vermont, specialized in silent capital, preferred questions to answers. I told her, "It's time, but I want it clean. No names, no press." She paused, then said, "Are you asking me to help fund your ex-husband's company?" I didn't flinch. "I'm asking you to help save jobs. I don't care who signs the papers as long as 1 signature isn't mine." She laughed softly. "God, you're dangerous in the best way." The paperwork took 2 weeks. I moved through it like a ghost, created a shell entity, small, clean, untraceable, transferred just enough to steady the floor, but not so much they could climb on my back again. The deal was simple. Bridge financing, 1 quarter. No equity demanded, no board seat requested, only clause. Anonymity absolute. I didn't want gratitude. I didn't even want results. I just wanted the dignity of not turning away when something I had helped build began to rot. When it closed, I signed only with initials CT, nothing more. But I still printed the agreement, held it in my hands like a photograph of someone I used to be. I folded it once and slipped it into the back of my notebook. On the page opposite, I wrote, "I didn't save him. I just didn't let myself forget I could still build." That evening, I opened my notebook, the one I used to track ideas, groceries, passing thoughts. Tucked between a grocery list and a half-written haiku was the first investment check I ever wrote. 5 figures, enough to scare me at the time, enough to believe I was serious. I never cashed it, never gave it away, just kept it there, like a seed I couldn't name yet. Now I folded it again, not with regret, but with respect. Some things we do for others. Some things we do to remember that we still can. The next morning, I walked past the old financial district. It had changed. Fewer suits, more cafes. Glass towers that used to intimidate me now looked hollow. And there, on the side of a mid-rise building, I saw his name being taken down, letter by letter. An old brand fading into new ownership. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt done. Like watching the last page of a book you no longer needed to reread. I sat at a bench nearby, let the sunlight hit the corner of my planner, and wrote, I gave back without needing to be known. I survived without needing to be thanked. I chose peace when noise was available. And then I underlined one word, chose. Because that's what healing is sometimes. Not arrival, just a quiet choice. Made daily, Catalyst didn't collapse. They restructured. They made payroll. They trimmed the top-heavy teams and quietly canceled a few vanity projects. The headlines moved on. From crisis to strategic pivot. The press credited a new CFO. The board called it disciplined adjustment. He gave a quote about staying agile in a turbulent market. No one mentioned the bridge loan. No one asked where the funding came from. And that was exactly as I intended. I watched from a distance. Not the kind with binoculars. The kind that lets your hands stay clean and your heart stay intact. A friend sent me a screenshot one day. Catalyst announces new employee benefits plan. Beneath it, a photo of a woman I'd once hired as an intern, now head of people and culture. I smiled, not because they'd made it, but because someone like her had. I still didn't speak to him, not through lawyers, not through mutual friends. He didn't know I was living just 3 subway stops away. But sometimes, late at night, I'd wonder if he ever thought about the missing piece. The hand that held him one last time without ever showing its palm. Then I'd close my eyes and remind myself, I didn't hide. I simply stopped raising my voice in places that wouldn't listen. I started mentoring again, not formally, not in panels or on podcasts, just small conversations, coffee shop meetings, quiet emails that began with, I heard you used to be good with messy numbers. I never signed with my full name, just C from Midtown. They didn't need my resume. They needed someone who understood what it meant to build something that wouldn't make the news, but might pay someone's rent. Once a month, I walked by a small bookstore tucked behind a florist. One day, I noticed a copy of Women Who Build in the window. I had contributed a chapter, ghostwritten, anonymous, footnoted under insight from a former insider. I never told anyone, but I did watch as a young woman picked up the book, flipped through the pages, paused on a paragraph I remembered writing. She smiled, then bought the book. That was enough. In my kitchen, the fig tree had begun to bear fruit. Just 2 small bulbs, still green, still uncertain. I didn't post about it. Didn't take photos. I just whispered to the leaves, thank you for not needing to be impressive. They grew anyway. This morning, I walked a different route. The air smelled like paper and rain. The streets had softened, washed clean overnight. It was the kind of weather that made you remember things, not because they hurt, but because they no longer did. I passed the building. His name was gone now, replaced with a generic acronym in sans serif font. Nothing grand, just functional. I didn't stop, just let my hand trail the edge of the concrete wall as I passed. Once this place had made me feel small. Now it was just a building with too much glass. At the corner, a woman held the door open for a man carrying coffee. Neither noticed me. That felt right. I used to want to be seen. Now, I just want to be here, awake, intact, unburdened by the need to be remembered in someone else's story. When I got home, I made a list. Not for work, not for errands, just a quiet inventory of things I now owned entirely. My name, my story, my way of walking away without bitterness, my fig tree, my silence. I underlined the last one, twice, because in the end I didn't need to reclaim the stage. I just needed one moment to walk by what used to own me and know I was no longer standing outside myself, trying to prove I belonged. I didn't win. I didn't lose. I just let go. And this time, I signed it like I meant it.